So hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Strange Encounters Down Under. And today I'm joined with Sarah Chumacero, who's a creator and blogger on the paranormal blog Living Life in Full Spectrum. So hi Sarah and welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for coming along. I really appreciate it. I really like your interest in the paranormal, how they're so widespread, and you sort of bring an eclectic approach to the paranormal too. But let's just talk about your blog for a bit, which is aimed towards paranormal enthusiasts and investigators. You're an active paranormal investigator. You've been in the field for several years now. You dedicate your time to researching and investigating the paranormal, and you present your thoughts on all types of different subjects on your blog. So how did you actually get started in the paranormal field?
My story is probably a bit different to the typical paranormal investigator. A lot of people will tell you they had their first experience when they were a child and then they've been searching for answers ever since. Mine didn't really happen that way. I'd always had an interest in the paranormal, and I always read a lot of books about the paranormal. And I guess growing up, you would watch TV shows like The X-Files and particularly down here, The Extraordinary, which was one of my favorite television programs, which dealt in all sort of, spooky stories and weird things happening. And it wasn't until I was around 21 years old that I actually experienced a death in the family for the first time. And it was then that I felt I had, I guess, my first experience with what you would call a spirit or a ghost. And I found that quite intriguing and difficult to deal with, I guess, mentally. And I always wanted to do something within the paranormal because I'd seen on TV shows that you could actually go out there and investigate the paranormal, but I was always really scared because I'm that kind of person that's scared of the dark, etc. And eventually my brother just convinced me and said, come on, let's go on a public paranormal investigation. And they weren't as popular as they are now back then, so it was difficult to kind of find one. And I guess like a lot of people, I went on my first investigation and I got hooked. I had some experiences that I felt I couldn't explain, and I loved the whole concept, and I dived right in. I joined a team straight away and just started the whole research side of things, and I was out investigating, I think, almost every weekend. And then, things just, I guess, evolved and grew from there.
All right. Wow, that's very interesting. Your blog, Living Life in Full Spectrum, there you cover a lot of things, investigation techniques and equipment and experiments and theories, and you talk about famous paranormal cases, historical information on locations, and you give a general social commentary on the paranormal field and all things that are encountered in between, which is, I find, really good because it's, I really like that diversity in the topics that you pick too. But one of the things that I've found out is that, looking at the paranormal for a while now, is that about 80% of paranormal investigators seem to be mainly focused on ghost hunting, and that's it. Why do you think that is? What's the big focus just on the ghost hunting when there's so many other things, that I consider paranormal?
I find that quite interesting as well. And I've actually done some surveys as well to a lot of followers and just sort of asked, where are your beliefs lying, etc. And what's really interesting is that a lot of people will believe in that there is a ghost or a spirit, but they don't believe in the concept of UFOs, or they don't believe particularly in things like cryptids and Bigfoot, which I find quite interesting because it's sort of what makes one more plausible than the other. So I guess I don't really have an answer as to why, but I certainly agree that a lot of people tend to sort of just focus on the ghost hunting side, and whether it's not or not, it's just because they've had an experience in that area. Right. I don't really know why, but there is definitely a shift that most people just focus on that one area.
Right, yeah. Well, there seems to be quite a lot of technology available for ghost hunting, and I guess for some it's a profitable business, and why not? I have no problems with that. People love their gadgets, that's for sure. But the technology that can actually detect a ghost hasn't really been built, because we'd have to get our hands on a ghost long enough to do the testing. So that's my opinion anyway. So what is the technology actually picking up on, and what is the chance of false readings when using it?
The technology that initially was used for the paranormal field was things sort of just that electricians use. For example, you've got things like K2 meters and tri-field meters, which are basically used to pick up wiring in the walls. So investigators use those things with the thought that you're detecting changes within the atmosphere around you or changes within the electromagnetic field around you. And while a lot of those devices, yes, can tell you that there is a change in the area around you, does that mean that there's a ghost nearby? I think a lot of the time people connect those readings maybe with what they're feeling personally, but it's certainly not concrete evidence that there is a ghost or something paranormal happening. It's basically just saying to you, well, yeah, there was a drop in temperature, but you can't really say what is causing that.
Yeah, what does that mean exactly? Yeah, and I was listening to parapsychologist Lloyd Auerbach talk about equipment for paranormal investigations, and he said that the best piece of equipment is a human being. What do you think of that statement?
I would tend to agree because as humans, I guess we have that really great, and my favorite technique is that of observation. And I love just sitting back and watching. And when you actually also watch other people and you're removed from the adrenaline of a situation on a paranormal investigation, I find it really intriguing, because then you actually can see what is happening, and you can see people getting caught up in things, or you can actually see, there's a window open over there and that's causing a breeze to come in. But when people are so involved in sort of investigating, they're not really noticing that. So I think definitely that we can be our greatest tool, but in another sense, we can also be our worst enemy, because our brain is actively working against us as well. And it's, we're constantly seeing things that aren't there. We're hearing things that aren't there, because our brain is trying to fill in the blanks. And that's why we see, faces in clouds and pareidolia and things like that. So it can often cause us to see things that aren't really there. And a lot of people tend to think that that's paranormal.
Yeah, I agree. Of course, that doesn't rule out that there is something paranormal, but it's, I think that you're right there. And I think you've written about that on your blog, when a group of people are all focused on witnessing or experiencing a paranormal event together, like as in a ghost investigation, for example, they can feel or experience the same thing. I wonder, is that the focus of their intention that creates that, or are they actually seeing something, experiencing the same thing, or what do you think that's about?
Well, that's sort of where a lot of my research has led me. And I think a lot of that has been because I run tours out of a location called Black Rock House. I've had the blessing to be able to sit and observe people on a weekly basis and see what's happening. And more, I do wonder and it's something that I talk about quite a lot, is I wonder, is a haunting happening because the place is haunted, or is it happening because you have a group of people in the room and they're all focused on this one room? You're there and you're talking about, and I'll use the example of a spirit from Black Rock House, for example, that we talk about on the tour, Annie. And we'll take people into Annie's room and we'll tell everybody Annie's story and say, oh, Annie likes to talk to people and likes you to hear her story. So you then have 10 to 15 people in a room all focused on this Annie character. Are they unknowingly, much like the Philip experiment worked, where you could manifest your own spirit? Is their collective thought actually making this activity happen because you're so focused on this story of Annie? Or is it that Annie is really there and talking to us?
Yeah, that's a really good line of inquiry. I'd like to see more people, looking into that sort of things. In August 2019, you published your first book, Stuff Paranormal Investigators Need to Know, Volume 1, what the eyes see and the ears hear, the mind believes. And I think that's just what you've been talking about. But then in November the same year, you released your second book, Supernatural Synchronicity, which was co-written with fellow UK blogger Ashley Nibb. Let's talk a bit about supernatural synchronicity. Since you wrote a book about it, I'd love to hear more. What is it and how do we become aware of it?
So what happened was a couple of years ago, I was contacted by Ashley, who is a blogger from the UK, and he just kind of wanted to connect. And because we both were paranormal writers, and so we would have sort of chats over Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp and things. And we found our conversations would kind of, turn into these really long discussions about the paranormal. And even on the subject that we just spoke about with, are we making these hauntings happen ourselves and things like that. And we always wanted to do something together and we weren't quite sure what we would do. And then we just kind of said, well, what if we just brought the conversations that we have together onto a platform? So for a few months, we actually published our thoughts on our blogs. And when we finished, we didn't really feel like it was done. And we thought, well, why don't we pop it into a book and just, even if it's just for us, it's just for us. And it kind of just evolved in that way. And so it would start off with him starting a conversation. So his conversation was, okay, well, where do you think the source of psychic phenomena comes from? And he would write his thoughts, and then I would basically respond with my thoughts and say, well, yeah, you've got a point there, but this is what I think and this is why. And then it kind of just evolved into a long book of us going back and forth with our thoughts on all different things about the paranormal.
Yeah. So what is paranormal synchronicity though? What is it?
The reason that we chose the name Supernatural Synchronicity is we felt that like everything kind of came together in like this weird way to get the book to happen. And so synchronicity often is people think that, nothing is random. Everything's kind of happening for a reason and you've got all these signs and everything in front of you. And we kind of felt that all these different things pointed us towards bringing this book together. So that's why we called the book Supernatural Synchronicity. And we also wanted to show people that just because, and I think it's a really important thing in the paranormal field, but because we're both bloggers, a lot of people kind of think, oh, they should be, competing and working against each other. But we kind of wanted to show everybody that if we all actually work together, even if our views are quite different, you can actually further your research and further what we're doing in the field because we're working together, we're using our different thought processes and we're having adult conversations, not getting upset if someone's saying, well, no, I don't believe that. We're having actual adult conversations and trying to back up what we're saying with, particularly in supernatural synchronicity, we use a lot of quotes from philosophers and we take quite a philosophical approach to our research, just kind of saying, well, this is how it's evolved over the last few centuries. So we really wanted to show people that we can actually all work together and, see where it takes us.
Yeah, so that's sort of like when you work together like that, the combined energy of the collective somehow brings those synchronistic events into play, and then you sort of connect the dots, or those dots connect you. Maybe that's more what synchronicity is about.
Yeah, and look, we're finding that a year after that's happening, we're finding that that's happening now again with us, and we're sort of like, okay, maybe the supernatural synchrony is not finished, and maybe we need to continue because we're constantly just being drawn back into this particular area, and just very randomly. So I think you're right. Like it does, just on a collective basis, just connect the dots, and you look at as well a lot of the relationships and things that we all form within the paranormal field. And when you are investigating with people, like you're really connecting with people on a really vulnerable level, and these people sometimes know you better than your own friends and family do because you're really like laying yourself bare and raw. And so you do have to wonder when you're putting all that emotion and energy out there, what actually happens to it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. But let's just shift gears for a bit now. I want to talk about poltergeists. So some propose that poltergeist activity often occurs around children moving into their teen years when the hormones and emotions are all over the place, and perhaps these changes could cause them to activate some type of kinetic energy. Others suggest that there are forces attracted to their energy. But what do you think poltergeists are, and have you found that poltergeist activity occurs around certain types of people?
It's an area that I have been researching, and a lot of people do believe that it's something that happens sort of in preteen hormones and things like that. And it kind of led my research towards, I have done some sort of surveys and studies and spoken to a lot of people, because if that's true, and someone actually brought the point up to me, if that was true that it was a preteen hormone thing, particularly with girls, what about when a woman goes through menopause, for example, because that's an equally, if not even more significant hormonal event in a woman's life. And so I spoke to a lot of women that were sort of approaching menopause or going through menopause, and it's really difficult to gauge, because obviously a lot of the people that were responding were people that were active paranormal investigators and things like that, and felt that they had experiences, and they kind of were connecting things to those hormonal events and things like that. So it does make you wonder if there is that connection with the hormones and things not quite being right. But when it comes to poltergeist, I guess the traditional definition is it's something that's caused by a person's mind and they're unaware of it. And we've got sort of famous cases in the past, like the on-field haunting and things like that, which dealt with, again, the preteen hormones. But you've got more of a more modern day poltergeist case, which is a controversial one, but which is the Bothell Demon House of Seattle haunting, where there's a few books written, and actually the Society of Psychical Research and ASAP, and they've had all sorts of people go in and do reports, and working with Keith Linder, who is the person that's supposedly at the base of this. And, you know, their sort of findings are that it's more that it's he that's haunted more so than the location itself. So it does sort of lead to it's something to do with the person more so than the location.
Yeah, well, that was actually my next question too, I guess. Have you found certain types of people are predisposed to having paranormal experiences? And if so, you know, what's their personality type?
Definitely, I think there is, and I think that there is. There seems to be a connection, and I mean this in a very respectful way, but there seems to be a connection between mental health and sort of paranormal, I guess, phenomena. And it usually is when a person is not in a great place in their life. They seem to feel like they're experiencing something paranormal. Whether or not it's paranormal, I can't say that it is or isn't. But when you talk to people that work a lot of private cases and people that are really in need, a lot of the time that they do have some significant issues in their life. Sometimes a lot of people are living in a lot of clutter, and, you know, windows always closed and things like that. So you do have to wonder, on a paranormal level, is, you know, just being in that negative space, are you actually bringing that out into the real world and manifesting something?
Mm-hmm. So, well, I've been in the UFO field of research for 32 years now, and I've had ample time to observe the types of people who report close encounters, for example, and or multiple UFO sightings in their life. And I've found that they seem to be highly creative, or they were creative types to start with, but when their encounters began, that was magnified. They also seem to be more spiritually engaged, and less concerned about what other people think. And there's no doubt, I agree with you, that distress that people undergo, that seems to activate something in people that are, I think there are latent faculties that we all have, but under certain conditions they're activated to come to the fore. And so from my perspective, there is a certain personality type, at least who reports close encounter experiences. I guess that's what I was asking. Do you find, can you sort of give some descriptions of the types of people who actually might report ghost sightings and things like that? Not so much their surroundings, but them as individuals.
Yeah, and I know there's actually been a study, and I read it a couple of weeks ago, that an actual academic study that actually looked at certain personality traits, and like you said, you know, if they were creative and things like that. And if I was going to generalize things, I would say that a lot of the people, particularly are sort of more towards middle-aged, sort of even between 30s and sort of 60 years old, a lot of female. And a lot feel that they have come into a form of psychic ability when they were older rather than younger. A lot of people are actually discovering that they feel that they have some sort of gift sort of later in life. And I wonder if it's because when women are younger, we're focused on sort of our family and kids and things like that. And it's not until we're older that we can actually go out and do those kind of things. And I find that a lot of them are very sort of it's very belief based, so a lot of them do have that belief in the supernatural and the paranormal. I wouldn't say a lot are religious. A lot of people would think that probably many are, but I would say a lot are not. But definitely a lot seem to be definitely very spiritual, and there also tends to be, and again in general terms, a lot seem to be more into prone to believe in conspiracy, that study highlighted as well. So I think a lot definitely belief-based, and a lot particularly career-wise and things like that, is there people that I guess have the time to kind of explore and do something for them now, and that's in general terms sort of what I find.
Yeah, and that's the sort of things that I've found too. Yeah, very interesting. You were talking before about some paranormal experience. I think you were. Correct me if I'm wrong. That some paranormal experiences could be attributed to maybe expectation. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Right. But there's one type of paranormal experience that I cannot explain, and I'm a bit of a skeptic with many things. So, but I consider it a healthy skepticism, which you have to have in this field. But there's one type of vision, I guess you could say, of the deceased that I think can't be attributed plausibly to expectation, and that's Darien experiences, where people see deceased people who are not known to be dead at the time. So they don't expect that person to be dead. They're utterly shocked when they find out later that the person they had a conversation with had died days, weeks, months, or in some cases, even a couple of years previously. So what do you think is happening there? How do you explain that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's one of those things that I can't explain it, but I have heard that happening. And again, when we go back to that emotional connection that you have with people, a lot of the time people will report that a few hours before a family member passes away, they'll see them sitting at the foot of their bed or things like that, and they know that they're alive, but then 6 hours later they get a phone call that they've passed away. And so you have to wonder, is it that emotional connection and they're coming to say goodbye? I don't know. I find that a really intriguing encounter that a lot of people have had, and so many people report it that it's just one of those things that you kind of have to look into it really, as you said, with that healthy skepticism. But it's really difficult to say, oh well, you know, they're dreaming or things like that, because how would they know that they're going to pass away in 6 hours time? It's definitely a really intriguing one.
Yeah, and one of the cases I was thinking of was and there was no emotional connection to the person who was dead. It was just that it was the story of two people who were living in the same apartment building, and they were going down the internal stairs, and the living person said, "Oh, hi, how are you? You know, nice to see you." And the other person said, "Hello, you know, and a nice day," and they walked by. And then they found out later that person had been dead like a couple of months and they didn't know. I mean, that's intriguing to me. I mean, that's certainly at least a paranormal experience as far as I'm concerned.
It is. And I mean, look, the only other sort of thing I can think of at the top of my mind is when you're going to these things of time slips and alternate dimensions and things like that. Are we, you know, living many different timelines, and have we somehow, you know, when someone does see someone that is still alive, have we somehow meshed our timelines together? And I know many in the paranormal field have had an experience where they feel like like there's been some kind of time slip or something like that happen. So that could be another sort of explanation for that kind of experience as well.
Yeah, maybe I've often wondered about the rivers of time, and perhaps time rivers, or time streams could be reversed for if somehow that we're still yet to understand. Our physics is still scratching at the surface of some of those concepts. I think they'll be scratching around for quite a while, actually.
Yeah.
But you said on one of your recent Facebook posts that the paranormal also includes cryptozoology and ufology, and you just said it before we were talking. But I know investigators taking a scientific approach to those subjects would disagree. They would say they're not paranormal. And when it comes to the UFO subject, particularly, we know that paranormal experiences intertwine the lives of people who report close encounters. But, we have to make allowances that perhaps maybe we're just seeing advanced technology at work that strikes witnesses as paranormal. And I think that's a possibility. But what makes you think that the subject of Yowies falls under the paranormal umbrella? I mean, some people would say it's just the search for an as yet undiscovered species. I mean, is that paranormal?
You could absolutely say that it is an unknown species, and a discussion I've had with other people is that it could just be an evolutionary thing, that it's you've got creatures that are older than we even think. But it's not an area I spend a huge amount of my time focused on. But when you look at authors like John Keel, who talks about the super spectrum, for example, and you've got this sort of big, long electromagnetic field, and at one level you've got like ghosts and spirits, at another level you have aliens, and then another level you have things like cryptoids and things like that. And so his belief is that it all kind of intertwines and does wind together. So again, it just becomes more belief based, but I think you probably could, from a scientific point, argue that a cryptid is more of an evolutionary, or as you said, unknown species.
And yet there are people who report thinking that or claiming that they've had some sort of telepathic contact with a Yowie, or that Yowies have been standing outside landed UFOs, or those, or they've seen them sort of fading in and out of this reality. There's all sorts of strange things going on there that I'm yet to understand, because it's cryptozoology is not my first area of focus that I've spent many years in, but it's certainly been a long time interest. But yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and we may yet find that there is definitely a huge paranormal component to cryptozoology that we are as yet, really don't know. But in regard to that post that you put on there, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with the rest of your post that these fields should not stay so segregated, because when we remain insular, we fail to acknowledge similarities and or identify repeating patterns in various fields that they often overlap other areas of research. So have you been able to identify any connections between different kinds of paranormal phenomena from different fields that you go, oh, that's showed up there, and that I know people have reported that same thing too in this field, or let's say, say the afterlife, UFOs, cryptozoology. Have you seen repeating patterns in various things?
Definitely, I would say with sort of, I guess, the alien UFO side and the spirit ghost side, and a lot of people that have said to me that they feel sometimes when you're getting readings of an electromagnetic reading, for example, on a K2 meter, that you're outside, that perhaps you're picking up on a UFO craft or something like that. And a lot of people have felt that we're not actually talking with spirits when we're on a paranormal investigation, we're talking with aliens. And then there are some people that actually believe that it's actually us from the very, very, very distant future, but we've evolved so differently that, we're able to come back and communicate in those different ways. So definitely I have heard and spoken to many people about a connection between, I guess, the spirit and alien side, but again, not so much with the cryptid side, and it might just be because it's not an area that I look at, but I know that there are different people that sort of investigate that line of work.
Yeah. And I've had a few ghost hunters who have said to me the same thing that you just said, that they think that perhaps that who they're communicating with are not, spirits of the dead, but actually are extraterrestrials. And basically, how can you tell, if we're dealing with an advanced society, how can you tell the difference with an alien civilization and dead people?
Yeah. And I mean, I've had someone said to me that they had felt that, all of our collective knowledge from the past has been downloaded to these beings. So, and that's how they know personal information and things like that. So if that was, for example, the case, how would you know?
Exactly. Yeah. And you mentioned John Keel before, and his theory of the super spectrum, a type of unified field. And he talks about the beings who can navigate the super spectrum appearing and disappearing at will. And he called them ultra-terrestrials, and that's an interesting idea. But it's one that's hard to prove or disprove. But can you expand a bit more on your thoughts about Keel's super spectrum? Do you think it's could that explain how, say, some beings could appear and disappear in this reality, or some UFOs or aliens, or even cryptids like Yowies? I mean, could a super spectrum, that unified field idea, sort of explain the disappearance and reappearance of them?
I suppose in theory, yes, it could. John Keel's quite controversial in a lot of his views, and most people will know him mainly from the Mothman prophecies and that sort of thing. And when you look at the Mothman sort of more in depth, it's not just more of this moth sighting. There are other things happening as well, and other sightings that people were having of seeing crafts and seeing beings and things like that. And so I think that's where a lot of the super spectrum came from as well. And I suppose when you're talking about the paranormal, we're never going to know anything for sure. But if we play into this theory that, say, for example, ghosts need electromagnetic energy to manifest, and so that's sort of the basis of this super spectrum field. So if they needed that, who's to say then that, I guess, if aliens and cryptids, etc., needed that as well, what could that energy actually be capable of? So it's a real sort of mind bender once you get into that. But when you start putting aside your belief system and going, oh, that's sort of impossible. I don't like to use the word impossible when it comes to the paranormal, because you never know. When you start putting all that aside and then just looking at everything at a base level, you can kind of make connections again and just go, okay, well, if you've got this, maybe there is just this invisible field that can sort of allow things to come in and out. And that would explain a lot of the random experiences that a lot of people have. Or like you said, where you've got cases where there's a Bigfoot seen near a UFO crash site and things like that. Maybe it has something to do with that. It's quite an interesting area, and one that I think that people shouldn't, I guess, turn their nose up at straight away because it sounds so fantastic. Once you actually get into the base level of what is being said, it actually opens up quite a lot of possibility.
Do you think that it's possible that we're coexisting with a range of beings in the unseen world who possibly use that super spectrum, I guess, that unified field, to pop in and out? But they possibly populate the entire universe, or are they just hanging around Earth?
I think it would be naive to think that they're just hanging around Earth. I think if you're talking about energy in this field, you would think it would be sort of universe-wide, especially if you're talking about extraterrestrials and things like that, who are not obviously just exclusive to Earth. But you have to wonder, there's a lot of people that sometimes they talk about things like elemental creatures and even fairies and all these other sort of beings and creatures that people say that they actually see. And so you have to wonder, are we just seeing sort of a two-dimensional view of the world, and that there is all these other things out there, but we're just not seeing it? Whereas you've got these people that do have some sort of abilities and they are seeing these other creatures. So it does make you wonder, maybe we are all living coexisting.
Yeah. And maybe like another idea is that perhaps that there are some beings in the universe, or particularly on planet Earth is where we are, or around planet Earth, who have the ability to be both physical and non-physical. I mean, I've read about the Midwayers in the Book of Urantia, these beings who can have that ability. I mean, that would be really interesting, that and putting aside that it might be extraterrestrial technology, for example, it could be that they could have be both physical and non-physical, which is a really hard idea to wrap your mind around, isn't it? I mean, how many paranormal investigators do you think might even be thinking those sorts of things?
I would hope more than I think, but there seems to be sort of, and again, I'm talking in general terms, you've got investigators that are quite happy going out every weekend and having an experience or connecting with spirit, as they call it, and they're quite happy doing that. And if that's what they want to do, like, you know, you've got to be happy with your life and what you're doing. Then you have another section of the field, which I think is a bit smaller, and you kind of get tired of just that same old thing. And I know that's what happened to me. And after so many experiences, I kind of thought there's got to be more than just going out there with your digital recorder and saying, hi, what's your name? What year is it? How did you die? All those kind of things. Like, there's got to be much more to it. And then when you even just picking up a book and starting to read the thoughts of others, and even, like I said, you pick up that book, The Super Spectrum by John Keel, and things like that, it may seem really weird and fantastic, and as I said, that word impossible, but once you start reading it, you can actually start connecting things. And when we go back to that synchronicity thing, you might even start connecting those dots again to other experiences that you've had during your life and think, okay, so there actually is something more to that. But I would probably say that I think the majority of the field is quite happy just investigating and thinking that they're talking to a spirit.
Yeah, I'd like to see more paranormal investigators. Let me just say that differently. Ghost hunters who do exactly what you just said, but who actually also then continue on with helping the spirits of the dead move on, because I see them, what I'm seeing in the ghost hunting field, and yeah, I'm not in the ghost hunting field, so I say this with no ignorance and utter respect to those who do it. But what I've seen, people who are filming their ghost hunts, that they're, like you said, just trying to identify someone. But I'd really love to see them also helping the dead, helping them move on and find their way to where they need to go after they've died, because I'd certainly like that help if I was stuck here, you know. Wouldn't you?
I know, yeah, for sure. And it's something that comes up quite a lot, and a lot of people will say, well, why don't you move them on? And a lot of people will say, and I'm not spiritual, so I don't know the definitive answer here, but a lot of people will actually say that they're here for a reason, and a lot of the time they don't want to be moved on, but there are others that do help spirits move on. So I don't really know what the answer is there, but I think anyone that is doing any sort of ghost hunting needs to be respectful. And regardless of if a ghost or spirit is someone that was living, or if it's our psychic abilities or other things, most people tend to believe that a ghost is someone who was once living. So that's what most people believe. So we need to respect that. And so if you're going out on a ghost hunt, you can't just be screaming at someone who is possibly someone's grandma. It's disrespectful. So as you said, they need to go in with respect, and then, you know, ask them, what do you need? Do you need our help? And things like that. And the majority of the people I know do actually do that. A lot of the time, I don't think it's advertised on YouTube and things like that, probably because it's not entertainment. But we're
going to get a smack on the back of the hands.
Yes, I know. But there are people as well that will say that they're here for a reason and they don't want to be moved on. So I guess it depends on beliefs, and everyone has different bodies of work, I guess. But there are definitely some entertainment ghost hunting people that probably are more focused on themselves than the activity or the spirit, as you would say, themselves.
Yeah. Let's talk now for a bit about electric voice phenomena, or EVPs as they're known. And they're often recorded unaware to the person who records them. So EVPs, why don't you tell us what electric voice phenomena are?
Yeah, so it's basically, a lot of people will have a digital recorder and they do a recording, and then when they play it back, they hear a voice that they actually didn't hear with the human ear at the time. It's often sort of a breathless sort of voice, like a whisper, normally just sort of between 1 to 3 words. And people believe, well, some people believe that that is actually a spirit that is talking to them.
Yeah, right. So in some of those situations, I know ghost hunters will search for those, but other people will catch things. They're not trying to record EVPs, for example. They'll just be unaware, and it'll show up on their, in the years gone by, video recordings and audio tape recordings, but now in different other ways too. So that plausibly wipes out the idea of expectation causing them. Except to say in the case of the death of a loved one and those, inner longings, which are natural to hear the voice, their voice again. And that can be really powerful enough to potentially create an audio hallucination. But when they're caught on some sort of device, that's a bit different. And my understanding is there's about 3 classes of EVPs, and number 1 is the best quality you can get. So it's very clear and very understandable what's being said and by who. The voices can be identified. So something's happening there. What do you think that might be? Is it spirit communication? I mean, how is it even possible that spirits of the dead can actually communicate on technology?
Well, the thing is when EVP, I guess, as you would call it, was discovered, and through the many different pioneers over the year, a lot of them came to it by mistake. And you look at Frederick Jurgensen, for example, and he used to sit and he would record bird sounds because he loved birds and would research birds. And he was listening back to his tape recording and then felt he heard the voice of his mother, who had passed away. And so he then decided, okay, and changed his line of work and went into investigating this EVP. And I struggled with EVP for a long time because there, I guess, was one of the arguments was that the reason that it could appear on tape was because the human ear hears between 20 to 20,000 hertz, and that an EVP comes through at a range just outside of what the human ear can hear, but a recorder can pick that up. But when you actually go to the level of analyzing EVPs, a lot of them are coming through at a frequency in the between 1 and 300. So technically the human ear should have heard it. So that kind of gets rid of that argument. And so I kind of thought for a very long time, well, it's just people, they're hearing things, or it's just some sort of electrical interference and things like that. But I myself have caught maybe 1 or 2 really interesting ones that I couldn't kind of explain. And then there's other people that will say, well, ghosts don't have voice boxes, so how can they speak into a recorder? And that's a very valid point as well. When I went in and I started reading the thoughts of Raudive, who was also one of the pioneers of EVP, and he said that, and it changed my whole perspective, just this one line where he said that an EVP is an electrical event. It is not an acoustic event. And it's them actually being able to, again, to manipulate this electromagnetic energy and field and things like that. And so their thoughts was that ghosts or spirits can actually play with frequency, and that's how that they're able to communicate. And, you know, when you look back, this could even go back to this whole super spectrum thing where you've got that line of energy and frequencies. So that's sort of where their thoughts were. And I think that's where a lot of the research leads as well, because when you're dealing with things like frequency and things like that, a lot of paranormal investigators will tell you that they feel that there is definitely a connection there, and a lot of the time they will even play certain sounds and feel that they can draw energy out. So if they're able to draw energy out by using frequency, you would have to think that maybe a spirit could actually use frequency to communicate with us as well.
That was an interesting point, that you were saying. People say that ghosts don't have voice boxes, so how do they make a sound? Yeah. I guess it's the same sort of thing as with people who have near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences, but who have vision. And sometimes, and particularly in near-death experiences, they can have panoramic vision, 360-degree vision. I mean, how is that even possible? So there seems to be other things that come into play, or possibly that when we actually die, those faculties are triggered in some way, or possibly triggered in our non-physical form, so that then we have, or not even if we're dying, but close to death or having out-of-body experiences, that there are these other faculties that can be switched on according to the conditions at the time. Got any thoughts on that?
Well, it goes back to, and it's something that we talk about in that supernatural synchronicity that we spoke about, and because we were sort of wondering, you know, how is it that all those things happen, and how is it that some people can actually experience and see these things, whereas, you know, for example, I can't. And one of the thoughts comes from Descartes, where he thought that actually the pineal gland was the seat to the psychical soul, and a lot of people tend to believe that we're all sort of born and conditioned, and we have these abilities and things like that, but as we grow up, we're kind of told, no, these things don't exist, and things like that, and so we block that out, whereas others don't. And then some people just believe that it's just a, you know, it's to do with that pineal gland. And so I have to wonder, is that sort of that third eye, as we say, that allows us to see the world as it truly is? And it goes back to, I guess, with what you're saying, is are we coexisting with all these different beings and things like that, but we're just not seeing it. So maybe when we pass away, is our energy, now that it's free, I guess, of our physical body, is our physical body constraining us from seeing the world as it truly is?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah. Sort of like there are things that are suppressed until we're in a non-physical form, perhaps. Who knows? Yeah.
And I know, like, some people in the spiritual world will say that we're not shown things until we're ready to experience them. And I guess sort of once you die, some people believe that you sort of ascend to this next level of consciousness and things like that, because you've learned all the lessons that you've needed to learn, I guess, as part of your physical body, and now you're on to the next part of the journey. So maybe as humans, we're not ready to see and digest all of that. And I think I kind of tend to agree with that. I do wonder what would happen if the paranormal was proven without a doubt. I don't know if people could actually mentally handle that.
Yeah, interesting thoughts. You've just touched briefly on something I was going to ask you. Do you think that there is a difference between mystical and paranormal experiences, given that, you know, like mystical is spiritually symbolic experiences that transcend our normal human understanding or go beyond the range of normal human experience, you know, which paranormal does too. But paranormal doesn't seem to always engage our spiritual self. So do you think they could be just both the same and we interpret them differently?
It definitely could be just, I guess, a thing of interpretation, because I myself am not a spiritual person, where and I sort of more focus on the activity and the phenomena itself. But then you've got other people in the field that have, as you say, these mystical experiences, but they just form it as all part of one, as part of their paranormal journey. So I often say, even with anything within the paranormal, I think a lot of it stems down to how you view the world and what your beliefs are, and because they're what make us who we are. And so I could be standing next to someone and we could experience exactly the same thing, but I can guarantee you we'll probably walk out with two completely different experiences and perspectives on it. So I think it really comes down to us. And I mean, paranormal, in the sense of the word, you know, paranormal just means sort of outside of normal. What is normal? It's going to be different for each person. You know, there's that phrase that's, you know, what's normal for the spider is chaos for the fly. So it's you know, what is normal?
Yeah, exactly. Oh dear. Now Halloween is coming up soon, and you know, some believe that it originated from the ancient Celtic festival of, or we say it in English, Samhain, but I think it's Samhain, which over time evolved into the modern day trick-or-treat festivities. And I don't know if there'll be much of that going on this year with the restrictions, but we'll see how it goes. But some believe that Halloween's the time that the veils between this reality and other realities are thinner, and that's when the dead can communicate more easily with the living. Do you think that there are certain times or situations when the dead can communicate more easily with the living, or that the living can communicate with the dead? What are your thoughts on that?
I personally don't believe there are. I think that a lot of that, particularly with the Halloween, I think a lot of that stems from the pagan belief, because that's all part of their ritual, and I think that that's where that stems from. And a lot of people will say the same about the moon. You know, whenever there's a full moon, 3 days before and 3 days after, that's when the veil is thin and you can communicate. I personally don't believe that, because when we look at the actual documented reports of sightings, etc., and things like that, a lot of them are happening randomly during the day. And so I always wonder, well, why are we not investigating during the day? We're going at night. We're not sort of following the claims properly. But a lot of experiences are just happening randomly throughout the day. They're not on an anniversary. They're not on any sort of significant day. They're just random happenings where people are experiencing what they believe to be genuinely something paranormal, because they're not even out there searching for it. They'll, be in a location and suddenly they might see someone in period dress appear for a couple of seconds and then goes away. And that's not happening on Halloween and things like that. So I think when we make these sort of claims, my thing is I always like to back things up with data, and writing things, having investigation reports and things like that, and saying, well, if you believe that, that's great, but where's your evidence to support that? And so I always say to people, start journals and write reports after each investigation, and then I want you to go back and actually look, was it really more active on Halloween, or is it just that because it's Halloween and it's that spooky holiday, are you thinking that it is?
Yeah.
I probably think that they think that it is.
Yeah, so they're taking more notice because it is Halloween or whatever, that sort of thing. And yet, when there's a full moon, police and hospitals report that the need for their services is greater. So maybe it comes down to biorhythms, do you think?
Well, it could, and I wonder with the moon, and I've done research and things on this, and even when you look at the word lunar, like lunar cycle, and it comes from lunar. That's where the word lunatic comes from, and things like that, because they associated it with the moon. And even a century ago, people could actually claim insanity via the moon for doing stupid crimes. It was a valid defense. So there is something, I believe, with the moon. And my thing is, when I look at the research behind it, is I wonder, when you look at sort of the gravitational pull between the moon and water, and then you look at the water component of humans, is that's what changes us, I guess, in a way. And are we feeling that energy or that pull? I'm not sure, but that's sort of my connection there. And then sometimes people connect the paranormal with water as well. So maybe there's a water component. I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I certainly think that there's some sort of, I've had a long-term interest in astrology, and I'm watching the current events this year in 2020, what are going on, and just line up perfectly with various planetary, transits and aspects. So, yeah, there's definitely something there, and certainly something with the full moon, that's for sure. Yeah. I've just got one last question for you, because I've been grilling you for a while. Are you feeling it?
I need some water.
Okay. All right. So I hate this question because I've been asked it myself so many times, but what are your top 3 best documented paranormal cases that you think it would be hard for a skeptic to deny?
Oh, gosh.
I always say 3 because 1 is really hard, but was there one that tipped it for you that sort of really was a clincher for you, that there's something really going on here?
Probably not documented cases, because I'm quite skeptical of documented cases, because I can find holes in anything. Like I'm a bookworm, and I will read books on all different accounts of the areas and then kind of make up my own mind. I think that's what I like to form my blog about too. I bring all these different perspectives and then make up my own mind. So I don't think that there is one case that I've read where I'm like, I genuinely think that happened, but they do spark a train of thought where I go, okay, well, maybe, one that I am investigating and reading a lot about at the moment is the case of the Mothman sightings and prophecies. And a lot of people are arguing that it was just a giant owl. that they were seeing, but it doesn't discount all of the other experiences that the town were having. And so just reading the work of, you know, boots on ground investigating and actually going out and talking to the people instead of just making the assumption and saying, oh, it was an owl, or these people were hallucinating and moving on. So I find that quite interesting. So I definitely, I think that there might be something to the Mothman prophecies. If I was going to look at another case, there is a case here actually in Melbourne, which you may be familiar with, and it's actually a UFO abduction case, which is that of Kelly Cahill. And that happened actually not far from me. And just when you really get into the, you know, the points of that case, it's a really interesting case. And a lot of people, again, will just argue, oh, she had too much to drink and was hallucinating and things like that. But just all the events, you know, afterwards are really quite intriguing. And the fact that she ended up having to step away because people just ridiculed her so much. I mean, why would you go public with something like that, particularly in that day and age, when it was really seen as taboo? Why would you go forward and make that up if it didn't happen? So that definitely...
There were corroborating witnesses too. So.
Yes, there were. So that definitely was, that was another one that was really interesting for me as well. A third? A third's really hard. I don't know if I can pick a third that I would... Yeah, I'll stick with those two for now.
Yeah, actually, I'll just expand on that one. That you might have some thoughts with the Kelly Cahill case because Kelly came here to my home, and I was running a support group for people who had close encounters in those days. I ran 3 during the 90s, but and Kelly was here. She'd come to Brisbane for an antiques show, I think it was, and she said, it always struck me when she said that when she saw the beings come out of the spacecraft, that she said, they've come to steal our souls. And, you know, when you look into the UFO subject, there seems to be a real connection with extraterrestrials and the souls of human beings, and even possibly the reincarnation of human souls on planet Earth. So I think I would love to see more paranormal investigators look into that side of it, because there are a tremendous amount of, if they read UFO cases and they didn't think there's nothing to do with the paranormal, they're wrong, because it's littered with the paranormal. And even in a couple of years ago, I had a woman who told me about when she had a near-death experience when she was 12, when she was I think she was about 60 when she was telling me this, that she was in a stream, seeing a light at the end of a tunnel. She was seeing a stream of people. She was in that line of people going to the light. And then there was a stream coming back from that light, like they were incarnating souls. And in one of them, there was this poor little, what she described, poor little boy, she thought, who was, or child, who was quite emaciated and deformed and all that sort of thing. And then some years later, she came to one of our UFO meetings, and someone was talking about alien abduction experiences, and they had one of those grey aliens up on the screen. And she said, that is exactly what I saw at my near-death experience. So there's something else, something really big going on there. And that's not the first time I've heard similar sorts of stories. You must have heard a few too. What, have you got any insights on that?
Well, the first thing that's come to mind, particularly when you use, I guess, like the typical sort of grey alien kind of outline, is look at shadow people, for example, and the sightings of shadow people. That's exactly the shape and form of what a grey alien would be. So again, is that what you're seeing? I mean, why would a spirit or of a person like look in that form of just a shadow person? And some people have their thoughts that it's a form of negative energy or things like that. But what if, again, they're just ignoring that possible connection? And you're right, a lot of people that as you would say, more ghost hunters need to look at the UFO side. And a lot of people don't like being called ghost hunters, like, oh, I'm a paranormal investigator. But if you're just going to be focused on, I guess, the spirit / ghost side, well, then that's sort of what you are. Sort of a paranormal investigator is looking at the whole range. And I definitely think that there has to be more to that, because again, when we look at even telepathic connection and things like that, you have people that are psychic mediums that say that they actually have telepathic connections to higher beings and things like that. And when we're not exploring that kind of thing, a lot of people, and it's what I find a bit puzzling, a lot of people, particularly that are more in the ghost hunting side, actually shun that, and they think, oh, that's silly, they're crazy. But again, what makes this more plausible than the other?
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, very interesting conversation. I'm going to have to have another long conversation.
So.
I always feel when I do this, because these are introductory sort of interviews, but I'll get to the point where at the end it's just the beginning of something bigger.
Yes.
So I must have you back. That'd be great to have you back.
Sure, would love to.
More about those connections between the different fields. Yeah.
I'll look into it.
Yeah. So thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Okay.